afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Got a great program lined up for you today. A little later in this edition of Border Report Live, in studio with us right here in the Harlingen, Texas Stream Center, a Catholic priest, Father Brian Strassburger, who ministers to migrants waiting in Mexico who want to claim asylum in the United States, as well as those north of the border whose immigration status is uncertain. South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez is going to be leading that conversation with Father Strassburger in just a little bit. Really looking forward to speaking with him on a whole range of topics this afternoon. But first, as always, we're going to start today's edition by taking a look at what's trending across the border. Starting with today is now the 49th day of the federal government's partial shutdown over funding for the Department of Homeland Security. The shutdown began on February 14th and has gone back and forth among Republicans and Democrats up on Capitol Hill. Democrats want more safeguards put in place for immigration and customs enforcement activities. This week, Senate Republicans are expected to put forward a funding measure to cover immigration enforcement agencies. Our partners at the Hill are reporting that Senate leadership hopes to pass the legislation which would fund U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Border Patrol through reconciliation. This would allow it to advance without needing any Democratic votes. Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune is planning to keep the package small to get it through both chambers of Congress quickly, but hardline conservatives want to make additions, including defense funding, elections reform, and a proposal to modify capital gains taxes to reflect inflation. That all, again, according to our partners at the Hill. The Senate has already passed a bill to fund all of DHS except for ICE and Border Patrol, but House conservatives have lashed out against it. Today, businesses can begin logging in to claim refunds for tariffs imposed by the Trump administration that the U.S. Supreme Court struck down. Over $166 billion in illegal tariffs were collected by hundreds of companies. The High Court in late February ruled that President Donald Trump usurped Congress's taxation authority when he set double-digit import tax rates on products from pretty much every other country on the planet. It's taken a while because DHS initially did not have the software capability to issue those refunds. We've talked about that, Sandra Sanchez and I, right here on Border Report Live and on borderreport.com. But the agency says it now does. Brokers will be able to claim refunds through an online portal that opened at 8 a.m. this morning Eastern Time, offered by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Companies must submit declarations listing the goods they paid tariffs on. Refunds will be given in phases, starting with the most recent, and could take months. To receive funds, importers have to register for CBP's electronic payment system. We have a link to that portal up right now on borderreport.com. An 85-year-old French widow is back in France after she was detained for 16 days by ICE in a Louisiana detention facility. The family of Marie-Thérèse Ross is resting in France after what they call an ordeal. Ross was arrested in Alabama on April 1st after U.S. immigration authorities said she had overstayed her 90-day visa. The Associated Press is reporting that she was taken into custody wearing a nightgown and did not have her passport or cell phone on her person. She was then held at a detention facility in Louisiana. The Associated Press is also reporting that she was in the process of applying for a green card when she was taken in. Ross, who is French, was married to an American military veteran who recently died. Her arrest came after a dispute over his estate with some of his family members. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot said that U.S. immigration and customs enforcement methods were, quote, not in line with French standards and, quote, not acceptable to us. A caravan left from the Rio Grande Valley early Saturday morning headed to protest at the Dili Immigrant Detention Facility, which is about 4 hours north of us here in the Rio Grande Valley. Our Border Report's Sandra Sanchez was there to see them off and filed this story.
The sun wasn't up yet when Cristelda Vera pulled into the Flying J gas station in Edinburgh to lead a caravan of vehicles 176 miles north to protest at the Dili Immigrant Detention Center, just one of several groups going there to object to the treatment of migrants who are being held.
Today we are going to be riding to Dili. So it originally started as a 956 people from here to Dili. And then people caught wind. And right now this is such an important issue that caravans started to pop up all over. There's caravans in San Antonio, in Corpus, Fort Worth, Houston, and some activists have flown in from Florida and from New York.
Her group is called the Blue Bunny Brigade, named after the blue bunny hat that 5-year-old Liam Conejo Ramos wore when he was arrested in Minnesota in January with his father and then held in Dilley at the South Texas Family Residential Center.
We show up to protest, we wear our blue hats, we wear our blue bunny hat in honor of Liam, because Liam he represents so many children that are going through this. And when you look at that hat, how do you not feel something? As a human being, trauma because of the impacts of these policies that have really harmed our community.
400 protesters were expected in Dilley. About 36 came from the valley, including pets.
People are so fed up with the situation, and it says a lot with gas prices at $3.59.
No family deserves to be in a jail.
Pastor Ali Lopez Valcarcel came from Brownsville to caravan to Dilley.
It's a call for all of us who care for humanity, for justice, for love, for mercy, for us to show up and show these families that they're not alone, that what is happening to them is not right.
Somebody needs to do something about these injustices that are taking place all around the country.
Juan Martinez is with the Cardenalismo National Brown Berets. Several from the Chicano group went to Dilley.
I totally disagree with this Gestapo prisons for profit.
The group left for Dilley at 7:30 after passing out tacos, blue bandanas, saying prayers,
Loving God, we lift up all who journey,
and a rallying cry.
From the valley to your door, we won't take this anymore.
Then they got into about a dozen vehicles for the ride.
And joining us now to talk more about this caravan, Sandra Sanchez. Sandra, tell us a little bit about what happened.
Good to be back. It ended up being about 400 people, maybe a little bit less. As you know, the weather turned really cold here in South Texas suddenly on Saturday and rainy. But the people who went, they showed up at 6:30 in the morning, and many of them caravaned together to save gas, as was mentioned in the piece, because, this is a region doesn't have a lot of wealth, and they really stuffed the cars full, as every seat was full. Up at the rally, which is almost about 4-hour drive for them, Democratic gubernatorial candidate Gina Hinojosa spoke to the crowd. Her father is actually from the Rio Grande Valley, well-known figure down here. And also, these are some photos that we got from some of our contacts who went up there. Kathy Harrington, Madrinas por Justicia, was part of the group that showed up there. And also they took in the truck 400 hot dogs paid for by Bobby Pulido. Now, he's the Latin Grammy award-winning singer who is running for the Democratic nomination for Texas Congressional District 15. And, he was also instrumental in helping to get the mariachi child out of the El Valle detention facility not too long ago, and his family had been held at Dilley. And so, this has been a signature issue of his. So apparently, I was told he paid for 400 hot dogs. They purchased them, took them up there, and fed the protesters.
All right. Well, thank you for reporting. I know you were out there pretty much all day Saturday working on that one, so we appreciate you for that. But actually, I'm going to let you take this opportunity now to introduce the guest for our next portion of this edition.
Yeah, we have in studio here Father Brian Strassburger, and a Jesuit priest who ministers to asylum seekers in shelters south of the border, those who have been released north of the border, I understand since 2021. And you are with, tell us what organization you're with specifically here that's part of the Brownsville Diocese, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sandra. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I am the director of Del Camino Jesuit Border Ministries. That's our border ministry project that was started by the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, back in 2021. And we do so in collaboration with the Catholic Diocese of Brownsville, run locally by Bishop Daniel Flores. And we've seen a lot of change and developments over the past 5 years here on the border.
Yeah, let's talk about some of that. So going back, you were, or are you still, ministering to migrants south of the border? Is this Matamoros and Reynosa, or both? Tell us about your work south of the Rio Grande.
Yeah, absolutely. From the first year we were here, we started going into Reynosa, Mexico. First off, you'd walk across a bridge back in 2021 and encounter a informal encampment in the local plaza there. And so we started visiting and bringing humanitarian aid and celebrating Mass for people who are in that shelter and looking for an encounter with God's presence accompanying them in a very difficult time. That was still on the tail end of the pandemic, when there was no access for asylum seekers to seek refuge in the United States. Things have evolved in the years since, but we do continue to make visits to shelters and camps in both Matamoros and in Reynosa here in the RGV area.
Yeah, in 2019, we started Border Report. That's about the time that the big encampments formed on the Gateway International Bridge, just south of the bridge. Thousands of people, 1,500, almost 6,000 people living there. Did you used to go to that encampment in Matamoros?
Yeah, so that camp predated my time because that was during the Remain in Mexico policy when MPP was still in place. And so that was a population that was waiting for their asylum hearings in U.S. court but had to remain in Mexico. Then in January 2021, Biden took over as president and helped to process those people to await their asylum court dates in the United States. So when I arrived in the summer of 2021, that camp had been completely disbanded. And so the Reynosa one cropped up as a relation to Title 42, the pandemic ordinance that was in place. Of course, we've seen evolution over time, and that includes a time when the Matamoros encampment formed, especially after the government started deporting a lot of Venezuelans who had crossed in other sectors. They would cross in El Paso, be flown laterally by the U.S. government, and deported into other cities in Mexico, including Matamoros, which led to the form of a camp there. And so we started to walk with people during their journey in time and celebrate Mass in the camp there. So we continue to visit those informal camp settlements and then also a series of shelters. At this moment, for example, we're visiting 4 migrant shelters in Reynosa on a weekly basis, making visits twice a week. We visit a shelter as well in Matamoros once a week. We've also started going to ICE detention facilities here in South Texas, and we've been visiting the federal shelter in Matamoros that's receiving deportees, about 180 to 200 deported Mexican nationals every day. And so we've seen some of that evolution from informal camps of waiting asylum seekers to now where people are often stuck, or if they're in transit, the flow is the other direction, deportees as opposed to people seeking entrance into the United States.
We're speaking with Father Brian Strassburger, a Jesuit priest who serves as the director of Del Camino Jesuit Border Ministries. We're going to continue the conversation on the other side of a quick break, so stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Border Report Live. Joining us is Father Brian Strassburger, with the director of Del Camino Jesuit Border Ministries, for today's conversation.
Yeah, we were talking earlier. Thanks for coming on the show. I understand that you were first sent to Nicaragua and you didn't speak Spanish at all, and you spent 2 years there. Your Spanish must have gotten pretty good because you're ministering to people south of the border.
Yeah, thanks. I guess it's gotten better. I can at least defend myself in Spanish at this point. But yeah, it was quite the experience for me to spend time in Nicaragua, but it was a life-changing experience. It not only helped me learn Spanish, but gave me great exposure to a new country and culture. And so it's been quite a blessing the past 5 years to continue in that form of ministry, being here on the border.
So Pope Francis had urged the formation of this down here in the RGV. Tell us how you got here, because you're originally from Colorado, and then you readily jumped into this. You wanted to be part of this, right?
Yes, absolutely. You know, growing up in Denver, this maybe wasn't exactly on my horizon, but after spending those couple years in Nicaragua, and then I spent a summer working in Nogales, Arizona, and Sonora, and that really exposed me to the border reality. So when my provincial made a visit to the RGV back in 2020, he got the idea that maybe we need to send a small team of Jesuits to go down there. And that was inspired by his visit and seeing the reality on the border at that time, and of course inspired by Pope Francis, who probably the greatest global advocate the world had for migrants. He passed away just a year ago tomorrow on April 21st of 2025. And so continue to remember and honor his legacy. And this mission, I think broadly speaking, is definitely a part of that. And for me, when I got that call from my provincial inviting me to consider coming to the border to do ministry, after all my experiences, I couldn't have said yes fast enough.
Now tell us about the shelters in Matamoros and Reynosa, Senda 1, Senda 2. Are they still operating? How many people are there? What are you seeing?
Sure. All of the shelters in Reynosa and Matamoros continue to operate just at a much lower level of population. So a shelter like Casa del Migrante in Reynosa that usually had around 200 people now has about a dozen. A shelter like Senda 2, which I've seen have, over 1,000 people living in it, has single digits right now. So completely different reality because there's no access for people seeking asylum to get that protection in the United States. And so people who were stuck there when the government changed with the new administration have had to make decisions for themselves and their families. Many people have relocated to safer parts of Mexico. I know a handful of people who have tried to enter undocumented, most often without success. And then I know other people who have been safe. It's been safe enough for them to return to their home country. Those who remain tend to be the most vulnerable, often families with small children, maybe even a single mom, people who have had all their government documents stolen when they got kidnapped in their migrant journey, and so they don't have documents that could facilitate their return to another country or to their home country. And so that's why we continue to make our visits and accompany these people. It might not be a large population, but it's a vulnerable one, and that's a place where the church needs to be.
Tell us a little bit more about their vulnerability and who's preying upon them. I mean, we've reported in the past the cartel control many of the border cities, and there are, as you mentioned, many kidnappings.
Yeah, certainly. We saw a lot more kidnapping of migrants when there was more of a flow of new arrivals. Now that the population's kind of stable, we found the cities to be a little bit more safer. Obviously, there is still a lot of cartel control, and so there are safety risks that are accompanied, and that's why I think a lot of migrant families, when the border was closed to asylum seekers, sought to move to a bigger, safer cities like Mexico City or Monterrey and to try to look for work and stability there. But of course, when we close the border here, that has a lot of ramifications even in Mexico because a lot of the migrant population there, when the opportunity to enter the United States was closed, became undocumented migrants in Mexico. And so even for them to get work and find themselves a way to get financially stable is a real challenge. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about the vulnerable population that continues to remain in the shelters at this moment.
So what do they need and what do you give them? I mean, how is their morale? Do they lack hope? What do you do for them?
Yeah, I think what we see is how much people turn to their faith as a source of hope in the midst of despair, as a source of strength in the midst of a very difficult moment in their life and in their journey. And so that's what we try to bring as we kind of accompany people in these delicate moments. There's humanitarian aid that we bring with us to help with hygiene products and cleaning supplies and nutritional supplements, especially for children. So all of that is fundamental to our work. But the heart of our ministry is pastoral accompaniment and sacramental ministry. We're a team of Jesuits. So we show up at a shelter and we turn a table into an altar with our Mass kit. We invite people to gather around and to join us in prayer. And what we continue to see is how impactful that can be for people. The first thing you should notice when you walk into a migrant camp or shelter are the acute humanitarian needs. People need a place to eat and a place to sleep and food to eat. But there's so much more that we need as people in general. And so part of that is being able to tap into our faith.
I wanted to go north of the border now and talk about the two detention facilities, El Valle and also another facility, Port Isabel, that I believe you go to. And do you say Mass for migrants or do you visit with them? What do you do with them there, those who are being detained and held by ICE?
That's right. That was a new development for us with the change of administration. We decided to make our start being present in the local ICE detention facilities. And so that means we principally celebrate Mass with detainees who are there, or maybe a communion service, some opportunity to gather and have time in prayer with one another. And so, they're big facilities. Each of those have capacity of over 1,000 detainees, but we have a limited space that we're able to occupy. So we usually get somewhere from 8 people to maybe 20, 30, 40, maybe maximum, depending on which center we're talking about and the space they're allowing us to use. That includes being there on Easter Sunday just a couple weeks ago. You know, during the Lenten season, it's really easy to preach to a group of detainees where the Lenten themes of a journey through the desert and the suffering and challenges that come in this life resonate with their experience. So I found it challenging to say, okay, how do I share the joy of the Easter message with people who've been separated from family, often with no criminal convictions, and are finding themselves in detention, which for all intents and purposes is living incarcerated.
So how did you?
Well, you know, I'm reminded that Jesus himself, he shared his Easter message by going into a locked room where the disciples were hiding in fear. And so in a sense, a place like an immigration detention center is exactly where the message of the gospel needs to be proclaimed, that Jesus lives, that he offers us salvation from sin and death. And that's the hope that sustains us, even as we walk with Jesus and share with him in the passion and suffering in this life.
Now, have you seen a lot of people at the detention facility, or are you kind of cordoned off? You mentioned 8 to 20 people. I mean, are there 1,000 people at El Valle, for instance, right now?
Yeah, the population has declined in both those centers below their capacity of 1,000 just in the past month or so, but it still remains pretty high. And, you know, we had the unique opportunity on Ash Wednesday, an important day in the Catholic faith, to initiate the Lenten season, where we got to visit each of the different cell blocks in Port Isabel and have people gather around for a moment of prayer and reflection and to offer ashes as a reminder of our need for God's love and mercy. And so that was an opportunity for us to visit everyone. But otherwise, we have kind of more limited exposure just based on capacity issues.
We are running out of time, Father, but I did want to get at least one question in here, because I'm curious, you know, what is the response from those detainees from your missionary work?
It clearly has a deep impact on them to be able to touch into their faith. I'm reminded of a young man from El Salvador who I met for Mass just a couple months ago, and he was telling me, you know, Father, I think I'm going to be deported back to El Salvador this week, and I was expressing my condolences, and he looked at me and said, No, I actually feel like the Lord sent you here today to help prepare me. I haven't had the Eucharist in the 3 months since I've been detained, and it was my first opportunity to celebrate my faith, to feel God's grace in my heart, and I know that's exactly what the Lord needed me to have to prepare me for what's coming next.
Wow.
Thank you so much for joining us, Father Brian. We appreciate you coming on today, and hopefully we can call on you again in the future as well. We've been speaking with the director of, thank you, sir. We've been speaking with the director of Del Camino Jesuit Border Ministries, Father Brian Strassburger. Stay with us. We're going to be right back after a quick break. This edition of Border Report Live. If you're just now joining us during the live edition of this program and you missed our conversation with Father Brian Strassburger, the director of Del Camino Jesuit Border Ministries, well, don't forget that you can stay informed on the stories shaping the U.S.-Mexico border, from immigration to trade, security to culture. Border Report Live dives deep into the issues impacting life along the U.S.-Mexico border in podcast form. You can join us for expert interviews, on-the-ground reporting, and the latest developments. You're not going to hear about the border anywhere else at the places at the bottom of your screen: Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, and the YouTube app. Once again, thank you to Father Brian Strassburger for joining us today, our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez. My name is Rudy Mireles here in Harlingen, Texas. We'll see you next time.